showing interactive work is like a performance. It has to be recreated every time. It has to be maintained in a way, and if it's not running, it doesn't exist. But maybe the radical idea is that you can give a gift to a user, visitor, participant, guest, co-creator, which is you can say you can be a part of this, and what it's going to do is going to reflect you back to yourself and allow you to discover things about yourself you may not have understood, things which you can't put words to, things which might reflect your spirit, for lack of a better word, to you, something about your unique way of moving through space, your gesture, and allow you to see something in yourself, and that's a gift, and it's a utterly aesthetic one, but it has a kind of a political consequence, which is to maybe for a brief moment in time allow someone to feel like they really are connected both to themselves and to the world in a way that they have an agency in.
VR kind of had this early bump, which actually resulted in extremely deep research and things that are becoming very important today. But it was accessible to academia at a price point that was well out of reach of your average person. Now, with mobile technologies being sufficiently advanced, we're at the cusp of meaningful VR being readily available. So I think from an academic perspective, probably not that much has changed that's truly revolutionary and interesting, but practically speaking, getting lots of different types of people playing and thinking with these technologies is a huge difference. And I think over the next decade, that'll be far more extreme than it is today. It will be, ubiquitous kind of access to technology that's capable of these things. And where that heads, I'm excited to see. But you already see totally different types of artists and creative thinkers playing around with these things, which is what I think will head it down the paths that are most interesting.
To contextualize things, I started my work exploring multimedia, and multimedia experiences were initially, there was a stranglehold on their potential based on technological restraint, 56K modems, CD-ROMs and so on, that just showed the potential but weren't able to service the ideas that were emerging. And similarly now, there's lots of ideas for VR that are massive but require huge teams of people, and the economics of the production is still questionable in realizing the idea to the most full effect. But Zoom, in that 20 years that's been from CD-ROM and early into animation on the internet to now, what we're seeing is networked experiences with graphics card capability, and essentially there's enough hardware there to facilitate at least some interactive three-dimensional experience that gives the user a sense of a virtual world in a way that just in the past has been restricted to NASA flight simulators and things like that. And I think that obviously the mobile phone has helped get virtual reality headsets into households, and screen technology as well as IMUs and accelerometers and all the rest of it that are embedded into smartphones because they're so cheap now help these VR headsets emerge. And of course now with the introduction of augmented reality as well, and the new lease of life that AR and chance mass audience magic bullets like Pokemon Go help propagate it and help make a mixed reality commonplace within the digital sphere. I think it's really quite encouraging, not because it's there, but it's encouraging that it exposes the trajectory of where it can go to.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously one main reason is technological developments. Everything got really cheaper, right? A headset that we use today was $50,000. available for military purposes just 10 years ago, 7 years ago, not even 10. So this is a, from that point to $500 or, $599 is a drastic difference. So that made everything available, but everything around it. The other parts, which I think the experiential, like experiencing something, a medium, a content, is where we got to this point, because everything is experiential, right? Like you can customize your shoes, everything pointing to you, to your personal, with the momentary joy, or somehow it's all targeting me and for my use, and trying to get my attention or trying to convince me to do something. So I think experiencing world or being aware of this experience is socially conditioned us and made us ready to use virtual reality. That's an important aspect. My mom can use virtual reality for some reasons, and when you look at the predicted trajectory of virtual reality is, the real estate market is one of the top 3 potential markets. I don't want to go out to see a home, but I'd like to put that headset and then visit. And this convenience creates all other opportunities around it. And I think us being ready for that state was another important aspect. We were not ready in 1995. We were barely using smartphones. We were barely using internet, and most of the world's population probably didn't touch the any kind of computer back then. But today it's a different state. So, and it is still not ready. That's another funny part, because everything shows it's below the predicted the forecasts, the use of it, distribution, the market distribution and other distribution channels. But in the meantime, it really kind of captured the imagination of society. So everyone has got an idea what it can do in 5 years, 10 years time, and the AR yet to come, and that will change even more and take it further. So I think the whole the fluctuations probably started 1900s, the experiential design and using headsets. There are early examples, and then going up 60s, going down again, and 80s, another wave. This is the 5th wave, they say. This is the 5th wave of virtual reality, and it's crazy.
VR is a lightning rod because it has sort of precedent in fiction and films and this kind of thing. Like it's a signifier of the future. It's like on the shelf next to hoverboards, and flying cars and that kind of thing. But the fact is, it's sort of a trivial and small part of a wave that has already washed over us, which is virtual spaces. That we are surrounded by windows into virtual spaces, into 3-dimensional virtual spaces, and literally the world is being captured and recreated at scale in virtual spaces, and our telephones are views into those worlds, and these VR headsets and later augmented reality headsets are it's a window of a different shape into a world that's already here.
Where now we have AR and VR, and we can actually create interfaces that tie into our natural existence. Like the evolution has spent millions of years creating this interface, which is us, and now we can tap into that in a really highly interactive, reflexive way. So with headsets, we can now become something else other than ourselves. So kind of going all the way, I think, through that cycle and almost coming back around again into now that we can control every aspect of our existence in terms of observation, what can we do? Can we actually change the way we view ourselves? Can we change the way that our interactions deal with the data? So like I can actually all of a sudden materialize as a creature and learn new gestures that actually have different visual representation than I expect. If you can tell an amazing story on a television screen, it should be told on a television screen. But if you want to put on a headset and have access to things that couldn't otherwise exist without that headset. I think there's a lot to play with there. There's a whole kind of category of totally new interactions and social experiences that can be had. And that's where we're borrowing from cinema, we're borrowing from theater, from all kind of various types of art making to figure out what is this new medium. It's part of what gets me so excited about it, is experimenting in a really fresh space. In some ways, though, it's so open-ended and flexible that you could imagine many different verticals existing within the idea of AR storytelling, which will be successful. It's like, if you think about the birth of cinema, there was a rectangle, there was a frame rate. It may have changed frame rate and color and size, but it's the same idea. It's a square that's, and that constraint was actually quite beneficial. I think it allowed people to align and march for 100 years deeply down a path of what do these restrictions enable. And if you're just tapping directly into human sensory experience, there's a lot less restriction on that, which means you can do all kinds of crazy things. And there may have to be kind of some discrete pathways that get carved out as the ones we should march deeply down, while we're also lightly experimenting everywhere to figure out where those are. So that's one of the things that we're doing, is like a balance of like experimenting everywhere, figuring out what are the things we know we don't really like as our physiology, and then which are the ones where we really dive deep and say, okay, let's build not only a language, but like a grammar and a real deep syntax for how you tell a story in that path.
Each different creative endeavor using VR has got all kinds of different results, and building the grammar and having the opportunity to work out what the medium will be is really enjoyable. In a similar way to when early Shockwave and Flash was emerging in the late 90s, those explorations and those creative opportunities showed themselves to people, to designers and filmmakers and all kinds of different creative entities. And it becomes the most enjoyable part is the making of it. At the moment, the most enjoyable part of VR isn't actually experiencing it, it's the actual brainstorming and coming up with solutions and ideas that would potentially get traction in future VR experiences. I think that unifies people like Tellart and Marshmallow Laser Feast and whoever we meet along the way that is just embracing technological advancements, understanding their in an optimistic way the creative potential, and then trying to build grammar and new languages with it. I think that's quite fascinating because it unifies people, it develops skill sets on a global setting, which is just extraordinary. People are familiar with open frameworks in Canada as well as India, and it's all thanks to things like the internet actually, and the digital culture that has emerged from those experiments. In the case of web tools, obviously there were tons made, and similarly there's a whole bunch of extraordinary VR tools being produced now. Most will fall by the wayside, but some will really get traction and be used by everyone in a similar way to how everyone uses Comic Sans now.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting actually. You each time you're faced with a problem when you are developing for those new platforms, you have to develop your own tool to execute your idea, and you never have enough time to go deep enough in the tool that you've built to explore it and express it for years, because you have to move on and build another tool for it. Maybe that's the natural way of moving on from now on. And the way we build those tools actually providing us an understanding about the medium itself. And then we are expressing some parts, and if it works, you are continuing that way anyway. If it doesn't, you are moving on to another platform, another tool, and then executing that way. So I really don't see any major issues. I think it's a great practice which makes all of us makers, programmers, designers at the same time, or at least kind of this cross-platform thinking like the 17th century architects. So I think it's quite a positive change in the sense of what yet to come. Kids learning programming age of 7 and they will be making real tools, and they will be making their own games. I mean,
AI will be making the tools for those.
they
games
will
as
be
well.
making AIs that.
We do have the capability to hack and deconstruct and understand the underlying mechanisms of specifically emerging technology. And in doing so, we do so with the pursuit of finding new potential within that essentially reimagines or kind of comes to an emerging technology without preconceived notions or branded associations of what it's for, and can find new intention within that. So I think when you're looking for where the creativity and the story building comes, that actually it's with what intention do we approach that hacking or deconstruction process of emerging technology. And in that intention is a search for new creative possibilities, a new way to express humanity, new forms of representation and discovery of aesthetics. And within that is where the creative practice lives. And so in that way, the two things are hand in hand, and it's not something where we're simply hacking or for the sake of technical revelry or exploitation or showing things off, but it's to sort of pull the humanity out of the technology and discover why we're going this direction.
In response to the notion of sort of not taking the affordances of certain objects as given, I think that has been a core thread for us, is that everything is designed with very explicit intentions. So taking the camera as an example, it screams its affordances to you. And then again, all of the advertising about it tells you how to use it. And another example is the Xbox Kinect. And a lot of our original explorations came with not taking the assumptions about what the affordances of the camera are, and we're not taking the assumptions of the affordances of the Kinect for granted. And suddenly there's a new space for creating new outputs from these devices. And I think that for us, or I mean for me personally, there's a sort of a philosophical concept of the experimental photographer, someone who's making images but doesn't take the object of the camera for granted. I find it a liberated position, or kind of liberating creative position, because you can suddenly the possibilities are so much broader than just kind of working just inside the constraints of what the device tells you to do. And so whether it's interactive installations and sort of using 3D sensing and cameras for interactivity, or now we're given the framework of virtual reality as a framework, and using this approach, we can say, look, it's officially maybe for video games, or it's designed for certain things, but using this approach, we have the opportunity to think more broadly.
And there was a point in time, probably about a year and a half ago, where Alexander and I thought we saw the winds of change coming, and we saw a lot of industrialization around the similar ideas, and both sort of, the other products were emerging, people were doing this thing in different ways. It was like happening sooner than we had anticipated. So the science fiction was becoming, design nonfiction, to use your language. And we made a choice. We decided that, and it was along the same times we were choosing to not be kind of frontiers artists, but to sort of settle in this reality capture domain, that we had the ability to actually have agency in technology's future, and we had a unique perspective. So can we not participate in the actual production of technology products?
There's most certainly a need for us to creatively explore the tactile sensation, and we value that as much as the audio-visual sensation. We recognise, that it's all part of that multi-sensory experience. And once you get a grasp of the processional element of it, the fact that it's time-based, that we're working with irregular, unexpected spaces, to exhibit a VR headset in a forest is slightly unexpected. To see anything electronic in a woodland, we had to achieve the ability to transport people into a different sensory perspective. And essentially allow for people to escape into the virtual world. I think all of this, in putting goggles on your eyes and headphones and haptic vests, is an attempt to allow people to escape into collective imaginary worlds. And, you know, we do it very well in theatres and established entities like cinema, and at home you can disappear into a world as you watch TV. But what's extraordinary is we can have more in-depth and focused experiences with these headsets that obviously are still, there's a long way to go until they're competing with the dreams that people have, but at the same time it's that there's hints. And I think we've really got excited about that potential and the trajectory of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like to that point, the more neural networks we establish through those experiences, the haptic feedbacks, the scent, and the audible and the visual landscapes, the more memorable they get, because, you know, lots of synapses working in your brain trying to figure out all those sensory inputs. And when you left the space, you've got more memories to relate to that piece, which we found quite profound, because it's one of those things. And all the most profound or memorable childhood memories, or the ones that are, you know, there all the time, often linked to scent or a sound and a sight, and they kind of fused into one, you know, memory nodal, which is, I think, quite essential for virtual reality. Especially, we are quite numb to screen-based media now. It's, you know, obviously cinema is the ultimate medium to build empathy, but when you look at the simple facts, like those charities using 360 videos to collect donations, the ones who are using 360 videos are, you know, 70% or that number more successful than the ones who are not doing it. So this whole kind of, Barney says, the shaking the snow globe of, you know, the sensory matrix is actually allowing you to leave spaces as an audience, member of audience, with those profound memories.
We were using visual animation tools, real-time animation tools, and applying them to gigs, so electronic music and VJing. And then we realized, geez, you know, we can plug these real-time videos and traditional videos into lighting rigs and have a sound input and then physical tactile interface as well. And that exposed us and myself to more potential and the prospect of, like, geez, yeah, it is genuinely all converting and converging, and it is genuinely, it's not a case of things being virtual or physical, it's a case of sensory objects that can occupy space. And from VJing and those early experiments with motion graphics, I was then meeting more and more creative coders who were building tools, and we realized with our powers combined we could make so-called immersive experiences. And from the immersive experiences came things like robotics as well. And geez, you know, we could use 3D animation software with drones, and let's build the tools that let those two coexist and populate a space with kinetic architecture made from light. This was a big stage for us when we did these peculiar shows with drones. And then from there, realizing that kinetic architecture didn't have to be physical, using physical elements. You could just describe form in space and that was enough. It then allowed us to pursue virtual worlds more and try and pull VR and things, lift from theatre and film and gaming, and bring all of these disciplines into one immersive space. And at the moment we're in a kind of experiential phase, and where this mixed reality is upon us. And what we see our trajectory from here is embracing multisensory, the multisensory experience as something that people will enjoy and share, that is unrestrained in terms of their geographic location, thanks to the internet. And it's just, I mean, how can you not be excited by that kind of creative potential? It's one of the same, but it's just so exciting. It's really exciting.
Well,
That's so nice.
yeah, it's quite similar actually. With one thing, started with robotics. I started with robotics when I was really young. It's more playing with the robots. My favorite shop was a second-hand TV repair shop, which they get radios and all that stuff, so you can buy all that things off them really cheap and start building your own little robots. And then Atari was going on the side, so it's like two parallel things over the course of 20 years. It was always in parallel, but never mixed, till we start combining those softwares with robotics. And now you can take that 3D software and then give a character to an industrial robot that behaves like a human being in front of you. So that was the trajectory. But probably we all went through the same path, like Flash comes, and then it's just fascinating opportunities. You can do so much. You can tell different stories in different ways. And exploring that medium while that's happening, probably the birth of the open source culture and programming in different levels, and going into that open source culture, generative arts, and then combining with robotics again, and then coming today where we are at is virtual reality emerging, which requires your tools to be built by yourself or your team, and that combined with the real-time robotics that some have either using for input or output. So I think that's it. And the only thing that makes me really excited now is which part of all that pipelines we can deploy to an artificial intelligence. So we don't need to worry about that part, but we probably need to build that first and then kind of continue exploring the other parts. So going back to that, we are building tools each time, and then before we know it, it's too late, we need to move on and do something else. This is completely speculative, but if it's the artificial intelligence, that little robots that you build, or the little software that thinks and evolves with you as you go along, maybe that could be another option. But this is like relatively speculative. I'd love to have that actually. That would be great. Yeah, it's just like learns what you are trying to do each time and evolves, and gets this beautiful software at the end, customized for your needs, for your artistic expressions.
If the privileged position of saying I'm a story-first artist comes only with the territory of saying my technology is implicit and the grammar around that technology is well developed and celebrated and agreed to in a large community of creators. So filmmakers can say, I am a story-first person because filmmaking is taken for granted. We saw what was happening with reality capture and the affordances of immersive media, virtual reality, augmented reality, and we said, wait a second, what if we actually stopped here and let technology go forward in the way that it does, and not have to be interpreting every new emerging technology, machine learning and AI and the things that are happening now, and instead started to build a grammar that reflects what filmmaking and photography have become over the last centuries. Could we not then create the privilege of being story first if we start to define a tool set that actually is more limited? It was a very scary decision because it went against all of our backgrounds, a lot of our mentors. You mentioned Golan Levin is defined as a new media artist and is always working at the forefront. And we had to actually sort of choose to become Luddites, and as we go into the future, and in a way, I mean, it was a crisis for me. I'm like, what am I doing? I've lost the way. But also, I couldn't stop. Like, we couldn't stop going deeper into this new way of representing reality. And even though 3D reconstruction as an emerging technology is becoming a bit passé, it's very 2011, there's still a lot of work to be done before artists who don't care about technology and our story first can find this new domain and be like at home and just worry about expressing the world.
I think it's kind of an aesthetic sensibility to some degree. Like, a lot of people make very compelling, interesting, kind of transportive virtual worlds totally synthetically, right? They model it, they make it from ground up. I think that we have a background and we have a kind of a sensibility which says that the real world, the world itself, sort of the actual representation of people is strange and complex and kind of intriguing enough. Does a horse leave the ground in the course of running, right? And it's an unanswerable question until they sort of sort out a series of strings and cameras and, you know, explosive flashbulbs, and they sort of suddenly the world knows something the world didn't know before. Other examples are like sort of Edgerton stopping a bullet, you know, like suddenly we can stop time, and that's extraordinary, and it gives people a different view of the world.
We love technology. We like bending the form of documentary. What does it mean to do documentary? So we're attracted to stories that obviously where we feel that form and content really converge, but also something that really pushes our capabilities and how we can push the form in a different way, in a different direction.
It's a mission for discovering this new form of media where virtual reality and documentary intersect. How do we take the world that we're experiencing now, which is implicitly convolved with digital and interactive media, and produce visual experiences like filmmakers do that have the similar tone and intention and cultural heritage as a documentary. And we're inspired by the fact that these new photographic techniques, computational imaging, actually give affordances to people with a background in traditional filmmaking to start thinking about the intention of being a filmmaker, but using a new medium to do that.
I felt like I was always forced to be working on a screen, and I always wanted to create these worlds that people felt immersed in. But you're always kind of limited to this, you know, small, whether it's a tablet or a television, and then having the ability to actually put people inside of these worlds that you're creating and have it, you know, be totally surrounding you with projectors, and then using computer vision to actually track their presence was a complete game changer.
With immersive technologies, there's this term with television where you're suspension of disbelief. And with VR, immersive technology is suspension of belief. It's like, oh yeah, this isn't really happening. Like, I'm okay. I'm in a safe area. That little millisecond time changes your presence. It changes whether you feel vulnerable, whether you feel like even for a moment you're actually there. And I think that's an incredibly powerful and visceral thing when it comes to communication and storytelling.
Today's attention economy is everything is competing with each other to draw all your attention, and we only give like 50% of it to a screen and then driving and walking or whatever happening. Virtual reality it's an incredible medium that's, you know, takes all those things in the first go. The moment you are in completely. You cannot be distracted. So it's quite a luxurious medium for people like us. You are actually, you know, seeking that attention.
You cannot think about directing in the normal sense. You have to think of a space and how the space welcomes this person that you're inviting into the space. What are the rules you're giving them, the constraints, where can they move, what can they see, how are you inviting them in the space? And that's why we are using the words of story designing and story building, because even though it is a volumetric capture tool and it is based on, you know, this history of photography, you're now stepping into it instead of seeing it. And so it isn't about a frame anymore. It is about how you think, feel, and craft a space that's inviting for the people that are experiencing it.
People get to control their own view through the space. And then there are these new dimensions. There's the dimension of time. There's sort of social dimensions, interactive aspects. And suddenly we get to borrow from theater. We get to borrow from kind of immersive theater. We get to borrow from radio shows, et cetera, and kind of cobble those aspects together into a new set of references.
Installation design is about building spatial narratives, which I think translates quite beautifully into VR, and how you think about it and how you approach it as well.
There's a lot of techniques that we know about from our work in installation that allow someone to trust the creator of the space and know that it's mediated by some set of rules and logic, the same way film narratives follow a logic, but that can be freely explored, and no matter what you do, you'll discover something that was intentional.
Presence is a really tricky thing. And again, with the definitions, there's kind of a useful definition, and then there's like the actual definition. I think really presence is just the momentary feeling that you're there, you're someplace. I think when you practically apply that definition, like I've achieved presence through a great novel. Is that useful? Possibly not. I mean, I've played video games. I feel like I felt presence in film. But again, with that spectrum, with a lot of these immersive technologies, it's the suspension of belief that's happening. It's reminding myself that's not actually happening, which is a form of presence that's unprecedented, I think. It's all the other forms of presence are kind of trying to get to a place that is that level of feeling like you're actually there. And part of it is because in the form of presence you achieve through augmentation, AR and VR, you can use your entire brain without taking you out of that presence, or at least more of it. I think when you're reading a novel or watching television, there are parts of your brain, and we feel this as interactive artists often, the tension between being lost in a film or something and then having a decision point, and that decision point being so abrupt that it kind of takes you out of that experience. And I think the opportunity in some AR and VR things that I've tried are a level of presence that keeps the interactive mind stimulated and engaged in a way that doesn't take it out. You can actually have you and your friends have a shared experience, so that the canvas is no longer just your own senses. It's the relationship between you and the other person. So you're both going through a shared experience together, and that is... So I've gone off into like a wildly divergent tangent, but it is the extension of this idea of interface. Like what does it mean to have a ball of neurons interacting with the external world in all these different ways, these different aspects of being.
To some extent, it's critical to have, in the age of distraction, a place of focus and calm and solitude. Ironically, all of the headsets are network enabled, and most of the backers, look at the gaming industry and understand that VR is probably safest in that gaming line, right? The PlayStation have sold countless headsets and creating all kinds of titles that with specific shared gaming experiences in mind. And similarly with Facebook, Microsoft, Google, they're all very keen to have the shared experience as taking the fore. And so I don't necessarily think that VR is restricted to individual experiences at all. I think that they're going to be hugely social.
Yeah. It's like pre-internet computer versus post-internet computer, which is almost hand in hand. But a computer without internet connection and social media is the state of VR now, and internet yet to come for virtual reality and network experiences. Of course, I'd like to have a Skype call with my avatar in virtual reality than a 2D flat screen, as if we are sitting around the table. So, and those things yet to come. And I don't think it's necessarily an experience that we will be kind of almost closing ourselves. I believe it will be opening more, because in the context of education, a handful of the privileged people can sit in a theater, an amphitheater, and listen to this really great professor for that lecture. Just 500 people, 200 people maximum. You can actually have this experience in virtual reality. You don't even need to be there, but you can have exactly the same experience. So I think this is what makes me really excited about virtual reality. So it's like, obviously we need to be conscious about have what those consequences will be. But the consequences of social media, like exchanging our data versus privacy, but also gaining all those connections, networking opportunities, finding our elementary school friends, and unifying families. In the same way, virtual reality is another potential for this, bringing and democratizing so many fields in so many ways. I think we just need examples. I think we need to demand those examples. That's another important aspect, because when we were signing up for Facebook, they didn't ask us, would you like to exchange your privacy with me? And we signed up anyway. It happened, and it came afterwards. Years later, we realized, oh, actually, this is how I paid that service with my data.
For me personally, I'm going to speak like ignoring VR, just taking a step back, looking at social media and also the discourse around that. I come from a perspective where it actually saved a lot of lives, where, in Egypt during the revolution, social media or this isolationist technology was actually the way that a country wasn't isolated and was able to communicate to a world, and was able to own a narrative versus a nation state that was owning all the media outlets. So I think there's completely different ways of thinking about what is isolationist and what is the optimistic view of a tool and what it can be used for and the potential for it.
Virtual reality is going to provide a new medium that's going to be social, and it's going to be closer than any other device we've ever had. In that case, I think it's so important to kind of flag there are beautiful opportunities that will democratize so many fields, starting from education. But we need to ask the right questions, I think.
By current standards, this is bizarre behavior, right? Metaphorically, you're taking the monitor off your desk and you're strapping it to your face, right? And it's by current standards, it's unusual. And it is easy to look at this thing. It can be a lonely experience. It can feel isolating. You do look weird. All these things are totally true. But I think, like social media, there's always a hidden renaissance that one is not seeing, right? When typically an older generation or people that are embedded in an old model look at something emerging, anxiety should be and often is the first response. But there are going to be people who consider that as native, who are going to adapt it, and they're probably going to use it in moving, in social, in human ways, because some of that is innate, And I look forward to that.
I think fashion has the ability to conquer any challenge. And I follow Instagrams of young artists and kind of people in the sort of net art crowd, and the appropriation of virtual reality apparatus as fashion instruments is rampant. And how cool is that, right? So the ability for young energy discovering self-identity to totally cannibalize the previous generation's stigma is imminent in this challenge. So I don't worry about I worry about humanity for different reasons. And for the same trends that happen that make things that seemed apparent to our parents and what we do totally normal and now accepted, and then also understood. And I think that it isn't that it's just going to be celebrated and fetishized, but we deal with the implications of it, and in the way that we have dealt with the implications of emerging technologies and video games and standing too close to the TV.
I feel very strongly of the physical and digital marriage being a really important part of interaction.
I think on our end, we're more nervous about the tools and the method in which you engage with AR rather than the idea and the experience itself. And I think we would love to find a way that you could have those types of experiences, that sort of level of magic, without the tools being really kind of at the forefront in your field of vision. I think always our goal is to make something appear that seems impossible or like magic. And as soon as you have a $2,000 computer sitting on your face, it doesn't really feel like that anymore. It just feels like sort of amazing technology. The kind of recent history of technology has been really all about convenience. It's not about actual quality, it's about convenience. So if you take, for example, like, music, we've kind of slowly been getting less and less quality music, but with more and more convenience and accessibility. And so if you sort of look at kind of VR through that lens, and it's the same with 3D televisions, all of these technologies that people are kind of anticipating being the next big thing, you have to imagine, what is the convenient version of this look like? What is the sort of zero hassle version of this look like? And so, I think we're still very much not there yet. And it might require a less optimal experience for it to be in more people's hands.
These technologies haven't been around long enough in a meaningful way to understand the impact on a young mind. So, I'm very curious. I think all things in life are balanced, and there's some amount that is appropriate for everyone, regardless of age. There's extreme value in being in reality because we exist in reality, and if we try to tune our minds to other worlds, that will be limited to those worlds in terms of our usefulness. I think this has been happening for a long time, though. If you look at the way we exist today, it's mostly like this. And that was kind of a gradual process we didn't really see coming, but has transformed fundamentally the way we exist and the way we interact with each other. And I think there's some ways that's been a positive force, and some ways it's created new challenges for us. But I think the next stage of this is, probably something that's more immersive and more deeply engaging. So we're going to have to tackle those answers pretty quickly.
I think children, especially young children, they need to understand their reality before they go into a virtual world. But then as, they get a little bit older, I think I'm more comfortable with technology for creation. So if it's more of a tool for them to create something rather than just a passive experience, I'm more at ease with that. But I think really at a younger age, they really need to be tactile and understanding this 3D world before they go and explore a virtual one.
So I think, for us, what's interesting about architecture is it has a huge effect on the type of work that we're doing. We are often designing our projects in collaboration with the architectural design of a space. But sort of from a broader picture and kind of thinking about it connected to sort of children and development and the way that we think and sort of imagination, I don't know what it was, but as from a long time, I just imagined, like, what if architects designed from the perspective of trying to improve people's creativity and imagination? And if you look at kind of the tower projects that were built in sort of the 70s and 80s, the kind of goal of solving, like, let's get a ton of people into a small space and everyone gets the same apartment. It's this very idea of equality. You all get the same thing. But think about what that does to a child's brain when they know that they go to their friend's house, they go up a few floors, or they even go to another building that's designed by the same architect, and everything's in the same place. There's no surprise, there's no magic, there's no mystery. And then if you think about the opposite of that, which is that if every room in that building was unique, what would that do to a child? Like, as they're growing up, it would teach them that they should always be inquisitive. They should try and imagine, based on what I know, what could this look like? It would activate the brain so much more on just a subtle background daily basis that I just wonder, like, what would that society of children look like versus, the sort of depressing kind of modernist style of architecture that, was equal but very dull.
Somehow, seeing the big urban game that those folks had done, and so on, I just thought that's what the situationists lacked in the 50s and 60s was software. They lacked the notion of software. They lacked the premise of software. And if they had it, they might have said that what architects do is hardware, and then there's this opportunity to do something else. And that And so that's what we started doing, was basically building software for cities, and in particular entertainment software. You know, look, we started that in 2003. It took 14 years for Pokemon Go to be the mass instantiation of it, you know, doing $50 million of revenue a day, and at one point 500 million players. You know, we were right. You know, we were right. It is magical. It does change where people go and how they get there, and what their criteria for places are. Like, we were right about all those things. I think we just didn't realize, and also we didn't care, that those things only ever matter when they're bound to something that you already recognize, like a $12 billion franchise like Pokemon. That no one's interested in having a new experience of the world. What they're interested in is, holy shit, Pokemon plus something, you know, Pokemon plus magic, right? Like, you know, that's how you get scale on something. We weren't interested in scale. We were interested in the magic. The premise of augmented reality is that there's a way to render the interaction between what we see in front of us and some stuff that's not actually there, that the goal is to make that appear realistic, to be mimetic in some way. There should be some things that appear that are convincingly lit and have a convincing interaction with the environment around us. And first of all, it's just way harder than anybody is willing to acknowledge. And I, in the course of my work and time and travels, I've met with people who are at the furthest, as far out as you can possibly be, in terms of this dream of just overlaying stuff into the world. It's very, very hard to understand any environment on Earth, you know, without any boundaries or constraints, through a camera that is moving with zero latency, understanding occlusion and what glass is, and you know, and so let's look at the premise of that, right? And the premise of that is that that's how magic is made, is through mimetic reproduction, basically. And you know, it's like if you go to any comprehensive museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Louvre, you know, whatever, you will see that the goal of perfect mimetic reproduction is a very narrow chapter and almost a fetish in human history. It's actually weird, and that really art and the things that make us feel alive and important in the world, 99% of the time, they're what's beautiful about them is the ways that they pull away from reality as we see it. And I think the problem with most of the experiences that are being built right now for AR and VR and really just about anything is that it has things in the world that have their appearances fetishized and their behaviors neglected, you know, and the behavior is what makes things feel real. It's a position that says we take our meaning of the world entirely from what we see, and that is, first of all, bullshitty, and second of all, it's poor. You know, there's a poverty to that. I'm much more interested in things that allow us to take a sense of the world around us from other people, from our body, from the world around us in some way.
the thing that we're really kind of excited about for the future is sort of the potential for like this to happen on such a big scale that it becomes a true shared experience where, you know, you might be kind of walking home listening to music and like the city or the buildings around you are actually trying to like have this sort of kind of interactive conversation with you, or kind of really engage with you, or you engage with them in a kind of playful way. So, you know, it's definitely more challenging, kind of a way to approach this problem, but you know, I think the true shared experience is one that doesn't require anything of you, or doesn't require you to have anything on you.
I think one of the great things about augmenting reality is like it's your reality, but what you're experiencing with the state that it's currently in is not actually your reality, because you either don't have use of your hands or you have something strapped to your head, or
Yeah,
I think like once we can get to interactive holograms, that's I'm ready. I've got
Emily's
like
been-
so many ideas.
You've been talking about interactive holograms for like the last 15 years.
I know.
right?
I'm just waiting.